In our pursuit of the truth about reality, we got lost and began to believe that the map we had devised is the territory. Physicist Andre Linde, who was an advocate for parametric resonance in the theory of cosmic inflation, said it well in 1998, and I quote, "Let us remember that our knowledge of the world begins not with matter but with perceptions. I know for sure that my pain exists, my green exists, and my sweet exists. Everything else is a theory. Later we find out that our perceptions are based on laws which can be most conveniently formulated if we assume that there is some underlying reality beyond our perceptions. This model of material world obeying laws of physics is so successful that soon we forget about our starting point and say that matter is the only reality." Unquote. We must remember that science can't tell us what matter is, only what it does or how the world behaves. It can only point to the patterns and regularities of what is observed. Materialism, just like idealism, is a doctrine in the realm of metaphysics. Materialism or physicalism problematically assumes that unconscious, lifeless elements are all there is to reality. Mind, in this view, is assumed to be some kind of emergent illusion or byproduct of matter. What does the world really look like? Inevitably, we must summon another question in reply. To whom? Ludwig Wittgenstein was quite precise about what we mean by words, the nature of objects, and composite reality in his book Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. His philosophy certainly aided lexicographers and influenced logical positivism. It's a shame that this man started out as an epistemological idealist and ended up as a conceptual realist, dissing Schopenhauer later in his life as a philosopher having no depth. Wittgenstein was also born 6 days apart from Adolf Hitler, and both went to the same school, causing historians to speculate whether or not the former, as a young aristocratic upstart who often referred to himself as a Jewish genius, is what influenced the latter to become deeply anti-Semitic. The lines in Wittgenstein's Tractatus can be hard to digest, as its theoretical postulations are on the surface convoluted, but once readers get the idea that there is some kind of linguistic or semantic reductionism going on, with a bit of patience, one can follow his conceptual map. An interest certainly helps. Today, I might disagree with Wittgenstein's metaphysical conclusions, but it was because I watched a seminar about him years ago, which used the attributes of an apple to convey his thinking, that I learned about the problem of universals and Platonic idealism as a possible solution to what is observed. I find it ironic that Wittgenstein accused Schopenhauer of having no depth when the former couldn't get past his models and mistook them for reality, and the latter, as demonstrated by the likes of Bernardo Kastrup, clearly had enormous depth. In his Materialism is Baloney, Kastrup moves away from the water and quicksilver ocean analogies to incorporate the 10D membrane of M theory in order to demonstrate how helpful it can be to visualize everything as vibrations in the medium of mind. But he is humble enough to remind us that they are just models to help us understand ideas about reality or to convey theories about reality as it is in itself. As long as we conceptualize reality, we will forever produce models or maps of it, never the thing in itself. It is hard to grasp the so-called medium of mind without them. Even the word medium here is a fiction. The only way to truly understand the universal mind is to acquire its perspective. In fact, the word acquire isn't even strictly appropriate because we already have it. We are it. Just not focused on what's right at the surface. And I say surface because despite all the distractions of our monkey minds, we are core consciousness. I have also struggled to fully capture or describe some of my most profound experiences with psychedelics, meditation, out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming, etc. Experiencing the one consciousness, in particular, is beyond conceptual computation. The more I tried to conceptualize that pristine cognition, the more I seemed to move away from it. But it didn't stop me from doing it because I felt the need to tell others that such states are possible in our field of awareness. Christoph Koch had an NDE himself where he experienced pure consciousness and described feeling ecstatic. After getting inside a body he didn't think it fit in because his consciousness had seemingly expanded, and after recovery he went about his academic business and back to the usual physicalist mind frame, which incorporates a type of panpsychism in his line of work. But the experience obviously made an impact, and he couldn't help but seek Bernardo Kastrup to talk about it and hear more about analytic idealism. It was quite telling that at the end of that conversation, Koch admitted to leaning more towards idealism. My journey culminated in metaphysical idealism too. I used to have spontaneous OBEs and lucid dreams as a kid, but my practice didn't seriously start until about 15 years ago when I came across a book called Mind Games by Michael Powell. The book includes instructions on how to have such experiences amongst other things, and cites Robert Monroe and his book Journeys Out of the Body. It's worth mentioning that as a kid I used to have a recurrent lucid nightmare, always in a vivid replica of my childhood home, where I would be chased by naked albino men that would come through the walls. They seemed malicious and would smirk and leer at me. Their eyes were big and resembled those of court characters in a standard deck of cards. They would grab me and press my navel when I tried to scream, and all I could produce was an almost inaudible high-pitched sound. I used to struggle with them in a panic, and I remember one of them getting so frustrated with me that he threw me against a wall, causing me to go right through it like a ghost, where I came upon the living room of my childhood home and fell upon a dark-haired lady holding a child. I woke up in my mother's arms with her raven hair partially in my face. I would try to tell my mum about those dreams with my limited vocabulary, but she was clueless. I didn't know about the term lucid dreaming, so I would naively tell her, "Mum, it's the dreams that feel real," when I could have said that I felt awake in them, or that I knew I was dreaming. I remember being afraid of bedtime, as I suspected that the dream world was populated by real people, some of them monsters. After discovering Monroe, I began to explore dualism to see if it was true, and also I began to seriously explore my own mind. Monroe was how I really started. I met many New Age characters too, including Claudia Soprano around that time. I would also befriend Rebecca Turner, the founder of the World of Lucid Dreaming website, who was more of a realist. She decided to publish one of my articles on how to induce lucid dreams. She also introduced me, funnily enough, to the work of Christopher Hitchens. By this time I was already convinced it was all the product of brain chemistry. Michael Raduga of the School of Out-of-Body Travel had already made me a moderator to his OBE4U website, and also made me head of the phase management department, where I curated reports from subjects tasked with experiments and helped to work out statistics. This was as close as I came to being a scientist. Eventually, Raduga published one of my articles on the pinched nose test. Michael Raduga is, or was, a materialist and a pragmatist. He encouraged his students to use the term phase state instead of having them argue about whether it was an OBE, a lucid dream, or an astral projection. He had no time for belief-centric labels. Me and him still exchanged emails until he decided to perform brain surgery on himself in Kazakhstan and ended up in the papers looking like a lunatic. This move, for the sake of research, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid on his part, depending on how you might view it. My journey exploring the mind has been a roller coaster. Every time I visited people in an out-of-body experience, and the word visited here is controversial by the way, I would apparently see things that were on people's minds at the time rather than their physical surroundings. Either this or they made associations themselves. So I struggled with it. Is it coincidence, or is this enabling some telepathic quantum entanglement of minds, as Professor Michael Persinger once postulated? I also had an ostensibly precognitive OBE once, where the events involving my neighbours happened 2 weeks after my experience. So even as a materialist, I had moments where I thought, what the hell is going on? I even experimented with a deck of cards. I would shuffle them in the morning and place them face down on my bedside cabinet. Then I would go down to induce an out-of-body experience, or OBE, to check the top card and see if it matched. This is what happened once. I apparently rolled over and out of my body, although my experience so far tells me that this is a wake-initiated lucid dream that may or may not include autoscopy, and subsequently checked the top card. It was a fluctuating 7 of clubs. My bedroom was an inaccurate replica. I lost lucidity and had a brief ordinary dream about a woman with a crown being cuddled by a man, and this image gradually became a heart-shaped portrait before I woke up. I got up in the waking world and checked the top card on my bedside cabinet. It was a Queen of Hearts. At first I thought, this doesn't match the 7 of clubs that I saw when I was lucid in that dream replica of my bedroom. But then I recalled the brief non-lucid dream I had before awakening. Its narrative and contents easily associate with the revealed card in waking life. Other experiences in consciousness are more straightforward but can be just as insightful or provide food for thought. For instance, according to my experience, the entire world rests on my neck where a head should be. It's like a giant bubble extending all the way to the horizon as far as the eye can see. And then I look down and realize that the rest of my body is included in the same field of awareness. I am, it seems, a radiant emptiness filled with the world. The mystic Douglas Harding popularized his experience of headlessness in the early 60s and urged people to reproduce it in order to realize non-duality. This non-dual awareness is where we realize that observer and observed are the same phenomenon in consciousness, the spontaneous act of observing. Everything that comes through the senses cannot possibly tell us who we truly are because experience is constantly changing. Even our feelings change. Even our sense of self fluctuates. If we are watching a gripping movie like The Matrix, we may be so engrossed in its plot that we may completely forget ourselves. Our sense of self may diminish considerably even though we are well aware and focused on the film's events. But if we walk to the shops and we notice a stranger across the road glaring at us, our sense of self will increase. There is definitely a change there because our minds immediately conjure up an egocentric narrative, a narrative of I. At the sight of a stranger frowning at us, we are prompted to speculate on their intentions towards us, and as we contemplate worst-case scenarios, we think along the lines of, why is that man looking at me? Am I in danger? If I fight with this person, will I end up committing manslaughter? Or will he get the better of me? Will I end up in hospital? Would I die? I've dreamt of being different people with memories of things that never really happened, only to wake up as a new person in a world that, to my surprise, I had momentarily forgotten about. Once awake, it would make no sense to identify with who I was in the dream. In a similar vein, the sense that we are particular people with our idiosyncrasies in waking life may not be as solid as we think. It may be closer to the truth to say that who we apparently are in this life, or even what we currently identify as, is only what we think we are. But thoughts are only contents of consciousness. The thinking narrative constantly changes. What we truly are is that naked awareness. We are pure consciousness, full of potential, and it is ostensibly running the gamut of experience to infinity and beyond. We are consciousness, the very ground of existence, which is prior to everything else. Everything delineated in our perception is only an illusion of separateness, but the truth is that only one medium, as it were, exists. The world is entirely mental in nature regardless of how it behaves. This is monistic idealism. Panpsychism is now trending in the scientific community, but I wholeheartedly disagree with it. To me, panpsychism leads to absurd conclusions, such as a chair being conscious as opposed to being just an appearance in consciousness. Panpsychism is to metaphysics what Newtonian physics is to modern science. Obsolete. Panpsychism also smuggles in a kind of dualism because it still requires matter as a substrate for minds, apart from claiming that matter inherently possesses consciousness if it doesn't imply that a single electron holds proto-consciousness, whatever this means. It still requires matter to exist in order for consciousness to be. It still makes the same mind-body distinction that inevitably leads to the hard problem of consciousness. On the other hand, monistic idealism is to metaphysics what quantum mechanics is in terms of predictability and applicability to modern empiricism. One step ahead, one level deeper. It completely and parsimoniously gets rid of the hard problem of consciousness by denying emergentism and affirms that all experience is derived from a single medium, as it were, mind itself. If monism isn't more parsimonious than dualism, I don't know what is. The point I'm making here is that idealism is more parsimonious than panpsychism. It is backwards to say that things have consciousness. It is, in my opinion, more accurate to say that consciousness has things. The claim here is that the world is akin to a shared dream. Nature is a collective dream shared by multiple observers. Consciousness, as an irreducible essence, underpins all reality. Someone said to me recently that he finds idealism too abstract. No such thing as too abstract. An abstraction beyond knowledge is the assumption that a reality outside the mind, which is devoid of colour and sound, exists, as is the materialist claim. I'm not afraid of sounding crazy when I admit that one of the implications of idealism, which I find more compelling than materialism, is that we are eternal. Trust me, I'm not a religious person, and I used to be a materialist up until 2 years ago when some things began to happen in the scientific community in multiple fields, in particular physics and neuroscience. Some of my previous videos have been explaining that journey, and it's not just physics and neuroscience. Other fields also seem to point to idealism. There is some philosophy in my thinking, but it was science that caused my latest paradigm shift. I understand if it seems to go against our intuitions, but reality isn't what we take it to be. All we have is conscious experience. Consciousness exists and is irreducible. It is the ground of existence. It sounds religious or mystical because we've been led to believe that reality is made of matter devoid of mind. This is false. Under materialism, people will always struggle with the hard problem of consciousness. But you know what? There is no such problem. Ontologically, the base of reality isn't nothingness, as this one can't exist by definition. The next existential level up from non-existence is consciousness, which we know to exist and begets the world. There is a great place to start with idealism, which is the analytic model of Bernardo Kastrup and the conscious realism of Donald Hoffman. Kastrup is a former physicist who worked on superdeterminism at the Large Hadron Collider years ago when he was a physicalist. Now his metaphysics explains how it all works and gets rid of the hard problem. We are like whirlpools in an ocean. In the end, there is only water, which, in this analogy, represents mind or consciousness. His model also attempts to incorporate dreams, memory, and how the rest might work. The brain, in this model, is only a partial image of a mental process. The brain does not generate consciousness any more than the radio synthesizes the voices that we hear coming out of it. Brain function is actually more commensurate with filtration theory than what we are led to believe under materialism. In fact, to assume that a physical reality exists outside minds violates Occam's razor. Correlation isn't necessarily causation. To assume so is a materialist fallacy. It's known as the cum hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. You can look this up. Here's the radio analogy I've just alluded to. The voice on the radio might correlate with the electromagnetic oscillations in the radio circuitry, but the circuitry does not synthesize the voice. In the same manner, consciousness is not generated by the brain, as one would have to assume that unconscious elements generate consciousness, and here materialists hit an impasse. Materialism cannot explain why psychedelics, which reduce brain activity, by the way, can actually lead to mind-expanding transpersonal experiences. This is congruous with the view that the brain filters out much of what can be perceived and constricts our experience to a narrow focus. Even when people say that they don't have dreams, they are making an erroneous assumption because everybody dreams. And here's another thing about the notion of unconsciousness. Just because you don't remember something doesn't mean that you were unconscious at the time. You can only be in consciousness because that is exactly what you are. So your stream of experience is continuous. Another fallacy materialists make is the argumentum ad lapidem, or appeal to the stone fallacy, which began about 300 years ago when Samuel Johnson tried to refute George Berkeley's immaterialism by kicking a large stone. It was noted that the same actions and the same sensations that come with kicking a stone can occur in vivid dreams. Therefore, kicking a large stone does not prove in any way that objects have material existence. Answering the questions I was asking myself prior to my paradigm shift led me away from physicalism, which is untenable, and into idealism. It all began when John Clauser, Anton Teilinger and Alan Aspère proved local realism to be false and won a Nobel Prize for it in 2022. I also had questions regarding the mind-body relationship and took into account the undeniability of cerebral damage incurring mental deficits. But as I have found out, such eventuality is more akin to a damaged oculus not allowing the player to perceive a 3D game. Once you remove the oculus, your experience expands. It does not end. Note that even though I am practically claiming that consciousness naturally survives death, I am not claiming that God exists or that any of the religions that exist in the world today are true, unless consciousness itself is regarded as God by some, in which case atheism wouldn't apply, so it's always useful to ask people what they mean by God. Let's recall that Daniel Dennett once said, that in order to have an explanation of consciousness, we must start with unconscious elements in order to comprehend its birth. The trouble is that when dealing with consciousness, we are dealing with the unborn. We are dealing with a fundamental phenomenon. Consciousness cannot be reduced to anything that, according to materialism, is more than itself. You can find neurons in reality, but you can't find consciousness because it is a first-person ontology. Also, by Dennett's logic, in order to have an explanation for physical reality, whatever we mean by physical, one must start from the opposite, which would be immaterialism, rendering Berkeley's subjective idealism closer to the truth. The substrate of reality, then, is not nothing, as this one cannot exist by definition, as I've mentioned before. We do know of something which is not nothing, but also cannot be defined in terms of objects or materials: consciousness. Consciousness is what breathes fire into the equations that describe the world, so to speak. Scientists don't know what energy is, only what it does. Consciousness underpins all reality. It is fundamental. All we have is qualia. All we have is qualitative experiences. Everything happens in mind, which makes up the contents of consciousness. Everything in our field of awareness is just mind in motion. Consciousness, which is formless and irreducible, has the potential to beget forms which it can identify with. In the end, there is only consciousness, the ultimate reality. The world is nothing but a collective illusion shared by multiple observers, as physics tells us. And these observers, deep down, are of the same nature. There is only one consciousness. Monism is true. This isn't pretending that reality doesn't exist, by the way, as I've been accused of doing before. What I'm saying here is that reality is an illusion, which is different. An illusion is something which isn't what it seems. It's not nothing. Therefore, it cannot be equated with non-existence. So there is no contradiction in saying that reality isn't what it seems at all. Illusions are part of reality too. Illusions require a conscious observer to be mistaken about what is observed. Contradiction only comes into the equation when we conflate illusion with non-existence. I have been asked to present evidence that we, as consciousness, survive physical death. My reply remains consistent. If everything is mental, the mind doesn't go anywhere. You only have these options. 1. Physicalist monism. 2. Dualism. And 3. Idealistic monism. 1 and 2, if you can remember them, as I have already explained, have problems. So we are only left with 3, which is the most parsimonious option and the one with least problems. I am only telling you here that I find idealism more compelling than materialism. So if you ask me, my opinion is that once we shuffle off our mortal coil, we wake up from the dream of life. Presumably, you will no longer identify with your anthropic form, just like you no longer identify with your dream body, identity, and events when you wake up to realize it was all an illusion. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what happens, as certainty will only come when we experience death directly. Because intrinsically we are a pristine awareness, it could be that our minds are wiped clean to become a tabula rasa, emptier than a baby's mind, becoming awareness of awareness, such as metacognition, but with a potential to perceive an infinitude of forms. This is speculative, of course. Perhaps we become omniscient as we transcend space and time. Forget how crazy this may sound, because what we know now would sound crazy to someone in the Middle Ages, for example. The only thing I can infer from everything I have gathered is that experience is perennially continuous because consciousness, excuse me, as the irreducible ground of existence, cannot be destroyed. Now, I've had a few experiences myself with psychedelics, but the people who may provide us with more insight about what's to come, and it may be different for all of us, are those who have had near-death experiences due to the extreme physical trauma they endured and the fact that medical science can now bring back people well past the former threshold or point of no return. And what these NDE revenants report is quite remarkable. Of course, I don't recommend suicide just to find out directly, because in time we will eventually know, and focus should be placed in this life, in the here and now. I can tell you that under analytic idealist theory, there are some tentative answers to some of the questions you will undoubtedly have regarding near-death experiences or NDEs and death. But remember, it is only hypothetical but based on some salient observations. Despite the differences in experiences, there are some similarities. Kastrup has hypothesized, for example, that the near-death experiencer may access perception of this reality construct via living observers and may not be able to perceive anything that isn't being observed by anybody at the time. This could explain why a person in resuscitation may float out of their bodies and observe a pair of shoes perched on an external window ledge of a hospital, which is later confirmed to be the case, as the shoes are found at a location where others can observe them. But someone who has an out-of-body experience in order to observe a number on a high shelf, out of sight of everyone involved in a double-blind experiment, won't be able to make out the actual number, or may only be able to observe a mental filler or a perceptually reified guess from their subconscious. It reminds me of my deck of cards experiment with wake-initiated lucid dreaming, where the erroneous 7 of clubs was observed following a rather confusing state of superpositions in flux. The ordinary dream that followed, however, seemed to guess the real card correctly, which was the Queen of Hearts. And I do recall taking a cursory look at the order in which the cards were in before shuffling when I was setting up the experiment. One can only speculate about what really happened and the dynamics in which all of us operate. If it wasn't a remarkable coincidence, the non-lucid dream I had about a lady donning a diadem prior to awakening was quite telling. Either my mind possesses great predictive power, or a part of me already knew all along what the card in waking life would be. It's worth pointing out that NDEs are quite distinct from autoscopic lucid dreams in that they involve trauma where a malfunctioning brain could act like a headset that filters in more external information than usual due to temporarily having a more porous boundary between an egoic mind and the mind at large, or universal consciousness. Such transpersonal and mystical experiences are reported by the pious and the secular alike. Even children as young as 5, with no conception of afterlife realms or even death itself, report travelling through a tunnel to meet a warm light and are sometimes accompanied by shiny or glowing friends. There are those of us who don't even need to undergo great physical trauma in order to have incredible experiences of ostensible extrasensory perception. Perhaps some people's minds are more porous, as it were, than others, and it is plausible that some geomagnetic conditions may facilitate powers like remote viewing and precognition, as Michael Persinger once claimed. There is no reason to suppose that the brain's electromagnetic fields are contained just in the skull. Other than protecting the brain to an extent, the cranium isn't anything special, and it's all the same energy anyway. Let's not forget that wave-particle duality in quantum mechanics clearly betray a probabilistic framework at the root of reality where nothing has a fixed existence and non-locality is the case. Our skulls aren't sufficient to completely separate us from the universe. Biological barriers, though representing the patterns and regularities of this reality construct, are only illusory. It is all just Brahman, the infinite, and of which this world is a finite part. In Hinduism, Brahman is thought of as the supreme God, which refers to divine consciousness. This is a God that no atheist could ever deny. It is the I am that I am. As my friend Stephen Wallard pointed out, atheists and secularists only have a case against scriptural literalism, which defines God as some entity separate from the universe. Excuse me. Idealists, on the other hand, would have no qualms embracing pantheism if they see value in the God concept. People like Matt Dillahunty do not understand idealism because they prioritise their political activism against the threat of Christian fundamentalism in America, and they would rather remain militant atheists instead of embracing a worldview that might give their opponents an inch. They would rather ignore immaterialism. This is why literalists like Dillahunty insist on refuting the theistic and deistic gods separate from the world, because they know they will always win against challengers and perpetuate their secular shows where they look so rational and compelling. It's all a facade. In my days of being pretty much a nihilist and a materialist, I used to say that the best thing is to not be born, because once complex objects in this universe become subjects, then the aware units of matter have to wager their survival instinct or urge to self-preserve against an indifferent world, which is actually an observation that I talked about with Dr. Richard Oxenberg when we discussed how, in my last video, how evolution contradicts materialism. Worse still, the conscious physical configuration has to face an existential angst or terror besides contemplating their own demise and the loss of loved ones. That's a terrible thought in that one inevitably has in nihilism. I wrote the following years ago, when I was a materialist, and I called it Will, which was supposed to be a song. And it goes like this. I'm an existential Spinoza with a lot to tell, ready to deny Aquinas and Pascal in their assertion of hell. As Sartre pointed out, our existence precedes essence, so we invent our purpose instead. We shouldn't have needed Nietzsche to tell us, God is dead, God is dead. Leibniz said we live in the best possibility. Voltaire scoffed at the twat when he observed the world is a liability. Darwin failed to find divinity and intelligence upon examining the forensics of natural selection with due diligence. The oldest science is geometry. Mathematics is applicable to astronomy. If the universe is cause and effect, then there is no free will and no real autonomy. So I hope you get the gist. Like Spinoza, I'm a determinist. Nothing lost, nothing gained. Everything remains the same. Plain and simple, simply plain, still I play the same old game. Overtly numb, surpassing pain, wishing just to feel again. I try in vain to make it wane, inflaming all which I maintain, seeking release, searching for peace from this savage, masochistic beast. Unfortunately, our world is not uncorrupted. It is multicolored with personalities and all sorts of hidden agendas. The introvert and the monogamist are safer than the extrovert and the polygamist. The former would like a thrill, the latter would like to chill. As Kant proposed, seek the moral ideal, regardless of how it really makes you feel. There is no heaven, and there is no hell. The truth is a tough cookie to sell. The libertarianism of Crucius was so wrong. Wolff's counter-argument is the theme of this would-be song. But now, as an idealist, I see the story of Adam and Eve symbolically representing, in part, the human predicament. We have dissociated from God, so to speak, let's say God, to navigate solo, as egos. Now, with our egoic boundaries, we have responsibilities, and our instinctive orientations are mostly predicated on self-preservation. Now, we must endure disquietude as shaved apes with monkey minds, never at rest. Prior to our dissociation from the mind at large, we were, most likely, in the stillness of pristine cognition. We are, after all, consciousness itself prior to its contents, which make up the mind. We were, and still are at our core, naked awareness. I wonder about the symbolism behind Adam and Eve's realization of nudity. The tree of knowledge was also the tree of life, and they were naked without shame, almost like they weren't aware of being naked, which could represent the absence of metacognition. Pure consciousness then experienced curiosity and the urge to understand and acquire knowledge. Consciousness at this point is no longer naked. It is dressed up with concepts, complex vibrations in the membrane of mind at large. It had to explore its potential. The light of its simplicity and its clear nature was no longer easily cognized, and a darker trip was afoot. One urged by a snake craving change, willing to shed its skin and explore the infinite potential of mind and experience worlds in flux in a bid to become omniscient. Here's a quote by Giordano Bruno. Quote, "Knowledge and love are thus revealed as the two cosmic forces which are apparently separate in nature but which spring from the same potency and source." Unquote. So consciousness is fundamental. It doesn't require a secondary source apart from itself in order to sustain the very awareness quality that defines it. The Hindu monk Swami Sarvapriyananda used a light analogy to convey this truth, and I paraphrase here. Objects in the world require light in order to be seen. When we turn our bedroom light on, photons bounce off objects and hit the retinas in our eyes, allowing us to see them. But notice that light itself doesn't require another light source to shine on itself in order to be seen. It is its own light. And I'll leave you here with another quote, which is by Max Planck. "As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. Mind is the matrix of all matter." I hope you enjoyed this video. Soon I'll be doing a recorded conversation with some of the people in the Hermetic Idealism group on Facebook. with Stephen Wallard and others. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. Thank you very much.